ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्. ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaskar, my dear friends. This is third video on Isavasya Upanishad. This series is having detailed explanation of Isavasya Upanishad. This third video starts with explanation of stanza number 10. Anne devahurvidyaya Anne dahurvidyaya iti susrum dhiranam ye nastidvi chachakshire. One thing they say is verily obtained from Vidya, another thing they say from Avidya. Thus have we heard from the wise who explained that to us. Having said in general what he has to say about Vidya and Avidya, not only in accordance with the popular belief of the time, which can claim no doubt a crude Shastric sport, the great Rishi is trying to elaborate the idea and give it a new touch of orientation and a revolutionary restatement. In doing so, he too has to quote his authority. Thus, we find in this stanza a statement in which the Rishi declares that the popular notion is not all the truth. He says the results of Vidya and avidya are different from each other and they are not to be construed in terms of the non-general belief. Each of them serve a definite purpose. Sri Madhvacharya has a strange meaning for these terms. According to him, in the 10th mantra, cultivation of the right knowledge of Brahma is Vidya and wrong notion of Brahma is Avidya. Thereafter he goes to say that those who having the right knowledge do not condemn the wrong notions stands to suffer more than those who entertain the wrong notions of Brahma. In the ninth Avidya for Madhava is wrong notions and in 10th and 11th mantras to him avidya is condemnation of wrong notions. This is queer indeed. Having stated this much, the Rishi immediately adds that this opinion is not a product of his own intellect, spun out by his own individual mind, but that this is what he has heard from the wise who explained that to us. This is a very significant statement, inasmuch as Hinduism does not accept as a philosophy any purely intellectual idea just because some revered saint or sage happened to declare it. However great the individual may be, nobody has been given the authority or the prerogative to declare a philosophical truth and thrust it down the understanding and appreciation of the layman. Even if anybody declares a truth, it is not immediately accepted as it is the fashion in the West, but we accept it only when it has stood the test of time and the repeated subjective experience of generations of sages. Hinduism thus is not the product of a single prophet, but it is the wisdom declarations rising from the experienced bosom of realized masters, which have been relived by generations of disciple class, a truth that has been tested and found fit upon the touchstone of life by repeated generations alone is accepted by the Aryan devotees. Both Vidya and Avidya, in fact, are bondages. Knowledge is certainly a release from the shackles of ignorance, but the knowledge itself is a painful limitation upon the Absolute. One may get over the confusions of ignorance with knowledge, but in itself this will find us only chained by the limitations of knowledge. To transcend both is to reach the stage of absolute perfection. In the following stanza, we have got a correct indication of the exact import and the mutual relationship that is to be maintained between Vidya and Avidya. Stanza number 11. Vidyam cha vidyam cha yastadavedo bhayam sah avidya mritum tirtva vidya mritmashnute. He who knows at the same time both Vidya and Avidya overcomes death by Avidya and obtains immortality by Vidya. In explaining the great theory of action in inaction, the rishis have given this pregnant mantra to their Aryan generations. In the first stanza of this section, they condemned both Vidya and Avidya as guiding us only to a dark age when an individual or a generation pursues each one of these pair exclusive of the other. Thereafter, quoting the greater rishis of the earlier periods, the seer of the Isavasya Upanishad is now summarizing how they are to be pursued in a happy synthesis. When they are not to be done individually, the next possibility that would suggest itself to any student would be that both Vidya and Avidya are to be pursued in a synthesis. Synthesis of material activity, karma, and spiritual knowledge, jnana. Has been very often advocated by modern teachers of synthesis, but the exact technique of it has not been fully made clear. Here in the Upanishad, it has been explained beyond all doubts, and the expressions are as perfect and complete as a scientific statement. It is said that he who combines in itself both Vidya and Avidya together would overcome death by Avidya and obtain immortality by Vidya. Here Acharya Sankara has to quarrel with Bhaskara since he is one who believes Samuchayavada that Vidya and Avidya are of equal importance as practices for a seeker and each works independently of the other, with neither of them subordinate to the other. This is not necessary. We need not consider both Vidya and Avidya as independent of each other, with neither of them subordinate to the other. It is sufficient if we consider them as integral whole with a mutual relationship as Anga and Angi. They must be considered as serially connected. Selfless, dedicated work avidya prepares one for contemplation, and when through contemplation vidya is fulfilled in the direct apprehension of the self, thereafter the perfect one undertakes karma as a sacred, satisfying fulfillment of his realization and spiritual experience. When such great souls, Buddha, Christ, Vivekananda, and others work, the joy of life, the beauty of existence, the very values of life in the society are revitalized and reorientated. Thus, cultural revival takes place. These are days of feverish activity, social, communal, national, and international. Many are the blind advocates of activity. Every other man is a leader, and he who is not a leader now is but a budding leader waiting for his chance to bless out to be one at least in his own conception of himself. But in spite of all these leaders and their leadings, the world as such is gasping forward from confusion to despair and steadily and systematically tottering from despair to disaster. These are days when even the educated have started wondering why it is all so. The diagnosis and the cure are contained in the secret depths of this very pregnant mantra. Without Vidya, to act in the outer world of avidya is almost impossible. It is certainly unprofitable. Without knowing the rhythm and harmony of the entire cosmos, which unite together the plurality to act in the world of multiplicity, would be only to bring about more and more confusion into the world. Leaders and workers are striving to bring about unity, harmony, peace, and joy in the world, while they themselves have not realized any one of these in themselves. With an ill adjusted instrument of disharmony and discord, no musician, however great and willing he may be, can strike out even a single note of perfect beauty or mastery. The stanza says that certainly the experienced knowledge of the self Atmgyan would give us eternal liberation and immortal existence. For thereby we shall discover that we are not the body, mind, intellect, equipment to which belongs the irreparable change called death. Mortality is the tragic fate of matter, immortality is the blissful nature of the spirit. But having gained Vidya in this very life, there is a period when we are to live in this world as a liberated soul, a prophet, a godman. His duty is not there after to run away incognito into some secret cave of contemplation, there to enjoy the serener joys of his own realization. On the other hand, he has to fulfill his self realization in and through his activities in the world outside. Earlier, we have seen in stanzas 6 and 7 that self realization is not only in the experience that one's own self is divine, but this realization can be complete only when one realizes that his own self is the self in all. Unless we include and incorporate in our self experience the pluralistic world of imperfections also, the realization cannot be called complete. Rooted in the knowledge of our own self, the self realized sage or seer becomes the most potent factor in the world to carve out for it a destiny of unquestionable brilliance and success. An individual who has thus worked in the world in organizing humanity and in rehabilitating his generation in the greater values of life eternally comes to live in the memory of the world, carved out upon the memory of a grateful generation. These men of wisdom who work in the field of humanity remain as it were eternally on the surface of the globe. We have thus Buddha, Christ, Sankara, Muhammad, or Zoroaster as examples of mortals who have given no easy walkover to death, the consumer of everyone. These great masters, having worked for the upliftment of society, have entered so much into the warp and woof of the social fabric of the generations that are to follow them that posterity could not willingly let die their memories. Apart from this historical immortality of living in the memories of the grateful generations that follow the masters, these great men of realization overcome death that is caused by ignorance, avidya, because of their own knowledge, experience, vidya. Death has a poignancy and is a threat only in terms of fear we have for it. If once a great soul has realized its own real nature, it has thereafter no fear or dread for this phenomenon of change happening in the province of matter, which is generally called death. Death can frighten only him who misunderstands himself to be the body. To him who has realized that he is the Atma, death is only one of the meaningless, delusory changes in his body zone with which he maintained a sense of possessiveness during his days of ignorance and obtains immortality by Vidya. Mortality is, we have already seen, the fate of matter and not the destiny of the spirit. The pot may break and destroy the pot space, but the space in the pot is neither broken nor ever made. It is the all pervading space, ever the same. Similarly, birth and death, decay and disease, bondage and liberation, sorrow and joy, success and failure, etc., are all experiences available only to the ego center, and by themselves they are but delusion created appearances. This is realized when the pure awareness comes to flesh out, as it were, through the matter envelopments. The ego ends where Godhead experience starts. The mortal minus his ego is the immortal truth. As such, when a seeker, after surrendering his entire ego concept, in other words, when he through meditation transcends all his identification with his body, mind, and intellect, he comes to rediscover himself to be the pure Atma, and to him thereafter there can be no rebirth nor the chain of karmic effects to bind him down to the wheel of sansar. Naturally, he gains, in the language of our experience of mortality, the state of immortality. Stanza number 12. अंधं तमः प्रविशन्ति ये सम्भूतिमुपासते ततो भूय इव ते तमो ये उ sambhutyamrita. They fall into blind darkness who worship the unmanifest. They fall as though into greater darkness who devote themselves to the manifest. Stanzas 12, 13, and 14 are again another triple stanzas in which the same idea described earlier has been brought out for purposes of better clarification. The kind teacher understands perhaps that the idea expressed in the last three stanzas is too subtle to be understood by the student at the very first hearing, and it is so very important that it is necessary for every Vedantic seeker to understand correctly what is the exact relationship between Vidya and Avidya. In the earlier stanzas, it has already been said that Vidya and Avidya are not mutually contradictory or conflicting ideas. Each is sure death knell to the other, and that they are not to be mixed indiscriminately into a rough synthesis. It has been said that they are complementary to each other and they are to be undertaken in an intelligent sequence. First action, avidya, is dictated by our desires in order to bring us out of our inertia tamas into an active mentality of sprightly enthusiasm rajas, and thereafter through a pursuit of desireless activity one can gain purification of one's mind and intellect, which is a preparation for meditation. Later on, through steady and diligent meditation, the seeker gains the fulfillment of knowledge vidya. This same idea is being described here using another set of words to represent vidya and avidya. The pair of words used in this section is unmanifest asambhuti and manifest sambhuti. The unmanifest would be easier for you all to understand as the impersonal God and the manifest as the personal God. Among the devotee class, there always had been and there is a lot of controversy upon the relative merits of worshipping or meditating upon the personal and impersonal God. Even in the Vedic period, there were the personal gods like Vayu, Agni, Varuna, just as we have today the Puranic gods as Rama, Krishna, Shiva, Devi, Ganesh, etc. This controversy has now come down to our own times. In its practical application in life, it expresses itself as the great controversy on whether jnana or bhakti is supreme. The Upanishad here is giving us enough thoughts in its truth declarations to make us understand that our controversy is meaningless and baseless, just as we have seen that there is no controversy between Vidya and Avidya and that they are complementary to each other. So too, Jnana and Bhakti are not contradictory. In fact, each in the lap of other grows stronger and more established. Stanza number 13. Anne deva ho sambhava दन्नेदाहुर्सम्भवात् इति शुश्रूम धीराणाम ये न सिद्धिवि चचक्षिरे. One thing they say is verily obtained from the worship of the manifest. Another thing they say from the worship of the unmanifest. Thus have we heard from the wise who have explained that to us. Just as in the second stanza of the earlier triplet, here also the Rishi is trying to explain to us that what we generally understand by the terms manifest and unmanifest are not exactly what they connote in the technique of self perfection, but that they have some special significance. This new orientation of the idea is again vouchsafed here as not merely a whip of the Rishi's own personal opinion, but that it has the sanction of the entire hierarchy of experienced masters and their worthy disciples. Stanza number 14. Sambhutim chay vinasam chay yast davedo bhayam sah vinashen martyum tirtva sambhuta mritmashnute. He who worships the impersonal Godhead and the personal God together overcomes death through the worship of the personal and obtains immortality through the worship of the impersonal. Here Sri Sankara takes Sambhuti to mean the primordial matter, Mahat Tattvam, which we may call as Prakriti or nature, which is not in its expression as an effect but as the very cause for the entire manifested Prakriti. By the term Asambhuti, Sankara understand as the Karya effects, the Saguna Brahma, the conditioned reality. We need not go into this philosophical hair splitting and exhaust ourselves at present. Just as in the last stanza of the earlier triplet, we can also say that here the same ideas are expressed only with the terms changed. Instead of Vidya and Avidya, here we have the personal and the impersonal God used. This particular stanza under discussion certainly implies the meaning already expressed in the earlier mantra, and over and above it, it has got its own pregnant extra suggestions. The controversy between bhakti and jnana is perfectly proved to be empty and hollow by the suggestion contained in the mantra. It is suggested here that these two are not contradictory but they are complementary and they are to be practiced in a serial. Devotion to a personal God with a form and name is as much important for the higher meditation since continuous and intense meditation upon the formless reality is necessary for the great realization of the self. In this intelligent synthesis of bhakti and jnana together, the result would be, in the Rishi's own words, that we will be able to get over the sorrows of death, meaning the sorrows of finitude, because of our faith and devotion to the Lord with a form, while our evolution would be fulfilled completely as a result of our higher meditations upon the formless reality. A mere meditation upon the Absolute in itself, though it can give a subjective experience of the self, the Jivan Mukta state cannot be peaceful and tranquil without the firm hold on the life belt of a staunch and unshakable prem for the Lord of the heart. A mere Vedantic perfection does not make a man fit to live in the community of men and work in the field of avidya. To redeem his generation from the mental and intellectual dustbin into which it has fallen. In the contention, a renaissance, the great master will have to face different types of challenges in which he can easily find his equilibrium and poise only when he is efficiently guided and continuously renovated by his limitless devotion to the Lord of his heart. Sri Ramakrishna Paramhansa might and glory was his experience of the self, but his life's poise and equanimity were the special blessings of his beloved Mother Kali of Dakshineswar. Sankara, the redeemer of Hinduism, shall eternally shine out through the clouds of time and space because of his superhuman perfection and experience of his self, and yet he could face his opponents as he did in his time. Along the length and breadth of India and carve out of a decadent Hinduism, a Renaissant India crowned with the best of its culture because of his staunch and unquestionable faith in the goddess of learning, Mother Sharda. Sri Sankara takes Vinasa to refer to Karya Brahma, which was described in the earlier mantras as Sambhuti and Sambhava. But in this mantra, the Rishi says Sambhuti and Vinasa as one and the same. Therefore, Sambhuti in all these three mantras must be the same. The terms Sambhuti in the first half and Sambhutaya in the second half must somehow be made to mean Prakriti. But already Asambhuti and Asambhava were explained as Prakriti. How can this be accomplished? Sri Sankara achieves this by taking recourse to the grammatical license permissible to the declarations in and the style of the Vedas. Satya Sankara says Sankara reads the letter A before each of the words Sambhuti and Vinasa and take that the letter A denoting negation as having been found dropped in the original, permissible by the Vedic grammar Chandasham. This is again an instance where philosophers enter into unproductive arguments. One very satisfying explanation I had heard was from my Gurudev Sri Swami Tapovanji Maharaj. It beautifully reconciles this confusing contradiction. He suggested to us to recognize Sambhuti and Sambhava as meaning the birth of a new spiritual life, and Asambhuti and Vinasam as referring to the cessation and destruction, cessation of the creation of new vasanas and the total destruction of the entire existing vasanas. In this sense, Asambhuti, Asambhava, and Vinasam are all pointing to the same spiritual condition. They mean the annihilation of all material wants and the consequent absence of rebirth into this mortal plane in order to exhaust the existing vasanas. This explanation of Sri Gurudev Sambhuti, the choosing and therefore the becoming of a life divine, and the Sambhuti, the cessation of all undivine activities pursued when living as a helpless slave to a thousand mad passions, beautifully reconciles the seeming contradiction in this mantra. We need not haul in the sport of grammar and take shelter behind Chandasam, nor need we import new meaning to these terms, which have been already defined in a different way in the previous stanzas. The experience of the Brahma and its infinite freedom are described in the Chandogya Upanishad more than once, and at that occasion the Rishi uses the terms Abhisambhuti and Abhisambhava. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, also Rishi Yagnavalkya in his teachings to Maitreyi says, the mukta attains to vinasha and there is no other name for liberation. It is obvious that here the destruction vinasa is of the vasanas that maintained and gave a tone to the egocentric personality jiva of the seeker. Here in this stanza, the word death is to be understood in all its amplest significances as including and incorporating in its purview the entire principle of finitude in this mortal world of ours. A jnani who has the devotion of a Radha alone can live the life of a true Parthasarthi and guide the chariot of his era to a sure success and victory over the demoniac forces of decadence and stupor into which the history has fallen. Now we have come to the sixth wave of thought in the entire Upanishad, which to many of its critics is even an interpolation. To eminent commentators like Sankara and others, it is a prayer of a dying man on his deathbed. Orthodox Hindu families repeat these stanzas in the ears of the dying persons, but very few of them seem to correctly understand the true import and implications of these stanzas. That in the very first of the Upanishads we have three noble stanzas of prayer is itself a hooting satire at the thoughtlessness of those who criticize Vedanta as opposed to Bhakti. These three stanzas are an inner evidence in the very Upanishad to show that the Upanishad seers were not in any sense of the term opposed to the belief, faith, and devoted pursuit of a personal God. In the Vedic period, there were none of those Puranic gods to be worshipped since they are of a later addition to the wealth of the Hindu spiritual literature. Therefore, we find that in this Upanishad, the prayer is to the Lord Sun, who was to the shrewd intellect of the Aryan folk the clearest symbol of the mighty creator, sustainer, and destroyer of the universe. In the modern times, with all our scientific knowledge, it must be certainly easy to appreciate this great belief of the Vedic period. The universe minus sun god would be a chaos and not a cosmos. Life in the planets would have been impossible but for the blessings of this mighty Lord of energy and power. Again, before we start this section, I must warn you that to understand this prayer as a mere outburst of emotion would be to underestimate the sacred wisdom of the rishis. It has got a very deep significance of pregnant suggestions to a Vedantic seeker. We shall try to discover it as we open up each of these mantras to inspect its precious contents. Personally, I would suggest that true seekers should memorize these three stanzas along with their meaning and should repeat them, which would be an ideal prayer for a selfless seeker. Stanza number 15. Hirnam yen patren satyashapihitam mukham tatvam pusan pavarnu satyadharmaya drishtiye. The face of truth is covered by a golden lid. Remove, O sun, the covering for me, the practitioner of truth, so that I may behold it. On the face of it, this is a prayer raised to Lord Sun, invoking his grace and blessing so that the seeker may have the strength to remove the golden veil that hides the vision of truth. And this is the prayer of the dying personality on its deathbed, the meditation seat. It is interesting to note that there are two recensions for this Upanishad, the Kanva and the Madhyadina. According to the later, this is the last mantra, while the Upanishad as it stands full with its 18 mantras is acceptable in the Kanva reading. This need not be considered as a confusion because from this mantra till the end it is the prayer, thus these can be considered altogether as one wave of thought, Vakya. To consider this as the last mantra would be obeying the well-known Vedantic tradition that there must be unity of thought in the beginning and in the end. The Upanishad that started with clothed by the Isha is all this, must end in this prayer unto the nourisher sustainer. O Lord, unveil the reality. The world of objects and their glittering fascinations seem to envelop the truth. May I pierce through the apparent and reach to recognize and experience the supreme immutable reality. To understand it literally is to recognize only the superficial beauty of this inimitable prayer. In fact, the more we delve into it, the more we shall recognize the contents of this treasure chamber. Prayer in Vedanta is only an attempt of the ego center to attune itself to the supreme consciousness in the individual. Addressing the supreme consciousness, the ego center in the individual is chanting this mantra. The epithets by which Lord Sun is indicated are chosen with a special dexterity. Pushan is one of the innumerable names for the Lord Sun. It means the nourisher, the sustainer. The Sun is the center of the entire universe, itself motionless and inactive, and yet by its very presence it balances the entire movements of the universe around it, and being the nourisher and the source of all energy in the cosmos, it represents in the seeker's inner world the nourisher and illuminator, the Atma. The motionless center which controls the entire movement of the field is the source of all energy and of matter around it. The self, the spirit, the ego center is to die when it realizes its real nature and self. Thus, as Sri Shankara says, it is certainly the last prayer of the dying individual, but the individual meant here is the ego center. We are not to understand that it is literally the prayer of a dying old man on his deathbed. It is the last prayer of the active spiritual seeker in his meditation seat when he, in his divine effort, is seeking off his last vesture of ego, which is lingering to veil the self in him. The mind and intellect conditioned awareness ego, when it tries to understand and grapple with the pure awareness behind it, gets itself blinded by the glory and brilliance, and so it declares to the pure intelligence to unveil itself for its recognition. When the mind and intellect view out, they can recognize only the world of matter constituted of the names and forms. Preoccupied with these, it becomes impossible for the ego center to recognize the truth beneath it. Thus, the world of matter becomes a golden lid, brilliant and shining, which veils the truth behind it. At the doors of truth, as it were now, the seeker is knocking and demanding the nourisher, push on behind to open the doors of matter and reveal itself in all its spiritual glory. But what right has the seeker to demand from the Supreme? Such an unveiling is explained when the devotee declares that the truth should reveal itself unto him, for he is himself a practitioner of truth. This is very significant in as much as the seeker's goal is truth, his path is truth, and his very path to truth is led over with the truth at every step. In religion, means are as sacred as the goal. Through deceit and animalism, there is no path at all laid for evolution, progress, peace, or perfection. Continued love and dedicated loyalty gives to the lover a certain secret authority over his beloved. When a devotee has lived sufficiently long, a full life of divine pursuit, has his expanding heart of purity and faith gurgles up a flood of confidence and assurance in his own inner nobility and in the Lord's infinite kindness. In this confidence, the devotee dares even to command the Supreme to serve him to dire moments. This power to command comes to him as a privilege of love, in the authority of faith, sanctioned by the moral dignity that comes to him as a result of his chaste life of tapas, says Dharmaya Drashtaya. Stanza number 16. पूषण्ये कर्षे यं सूर्य प्राजापत्य विहु रश्मिन् समूह तेजो यत्ते रूपं कल्याणतमं तत्ते पश्यामि सो सावस्सो पुरुषसोऽहमस्मि. O Pushan, sun nourisher, O soul seer, O controller of all, Surya, son of Prajapati, disperses thy rays and gather by the burning light. I behold thy glorious form, the Purusha within thee, he am I. The very epithets of glory used here by the rishis is addressing the Lord Son are significant in as much as they declare to us as to whom exactly is the dying ego addressing. The philosophic import of the prayer is brought into greater relief by the unsaid suggestiveness that is implied in the various qualifications which are added to the Lord Son. They apply equally to the Atma, nourisher, soul seer, the controller of all, etc., are all amply self evident that they equally apply to the spiritual center in man. And according to the prayer, the prayerful ego, the completely integrated inner personality of the individual at meditation, when the mind and intellect are transcended, meets truth in silence to become itself the truth in its subjective experience. Also, it is to be noted that Lord Sun was the guru of Seer Yagnavalkya, the compiler of the Sukla Yajurveda Samhitas, and Isavasya Upanishad belongs to it. The Samhita itself was taught to him by Lord Sun. The sun is the greatest nourisher, disinfector, the great filler, who fills life with flavor. By thy grace may I reach near the Isha who indwells everywhere, including thee, seems to be here the cry of the heart at meditation. The idea that the spirit is not to be seen or felt or understood, but is to be experienced in an intimate subjective anubhava, is clearly brought out by the declaration, He am I, the Purusha within thee. This is not a declaration made by the self realized saint at the moment of his realization, but later on when he wakes up again to the world of the mind and intellect, he cries that he is not the body conditioned individual that he thought he was in his ignorance. But now that the wisdom has dawned, he realizes that he is nothing but the pure awareness, the one that resides in him, the Purusha. Before this final experience of oneness, He am I, we have been shown how there is a lower state of realization that I behold thy glorious form, wherein the ego still remains experiencing a divine exaltation. This stage is called Savikalpa Samadhi. This precedes the final stage of the total end of the ego when the seeker rediscovers himself to be the sought, the supreme self. This stage of experience of oneness is called the Nirvikalpa Samadhi. The knower of Brahma becomes Brahma is an oft repeated Upanishadic declaration, the truth of which is repeatedly restated in all the Upanishads. Man cannot see God, but God is not an inexperienciable non existence. Godhood is a positive state which can be lived and experienced, but unfortunately not by man but by God alone. It is because the man who realizes Godhood is no more a man but he is a God upon earth walking temporarily in the form of that man. Where ego ends, there is a blaze of perfection, the divine reincarnate. I am the Purusha in thee. Purusha Ahmasam. Earlier it was said that those who identify with their body mind vehicles, they are destroyers of the self. Atam Hana, ever bound to the wheel of change. Jana, when such an individual through dedicated activities, karma, purifies himself and through renunciation, tena taktena, comes to enjoy all this is the Lord, Esavasyam idam sarvam, he must necessarily cry out that I am no more the one who destroyed the experience of the self. Atmahana and lived in blinding darkness, Andhatma, in a sunless realm, Asurya Lokaha, but I am indeed he, the sun, self, Purushaha Ahasami, Amasmi. The wave that has realized itself understands and experiences the ocean. The ghost that has rediscovered its reality becomes the post. Man experiencing God, who is himself the immortal God, just for the purpose of elucidation and re emphasis of the most important point here, we must, through a repetition again, draw the reader's attention to a subtle truth underlying the very arrangement of thoughts here. First, the meditator cried out, I am seeing his auspicious nature, and thus he hushes himself into the silence of joy, thundering, He am I. In the earlier, the ego lingers and therefore it sees the experience divine. But when the ego has ended, the roar is not I am he, for there must be then the lingering I, but it is he am I. When the ego has ended, the experience is that universal reality, Brahma am I. Stanza number 17. Vayur mathedam bhasmantam sariram. Om karto samar kartam samar. Let my prana merge into the all pervading air and let this body be burnt by fire to ashes. Om, O mind, remember what you did. Remember what you did. After the complete subjective experience of the Sri Madhvacharya interprets Aham as not Heya, meaning not to be despised or discarded, and Asmi as the ever existing God in all creatures. He also sees in Asvaso a meaning, this Purusha Asam within the Prana, in Asavo in Prana. Prana is a symbol for God. The struggle is evidently to avoid the Advaitic implication so eloquent in the Rishi declaration. The Upanishad clearly wants to declare the identity between Asau, the universal, the transcendental Purusha, the Brahman, and Aham, the confused and confounded ego's essential nature as Atma. Reality during meditation, when the individualized ego center has come to experience he, the Purusha within the am I. What would be the condition of such a perfected master at the time of his death? When the ego center has merged itself in the supreme awareness, what would be its attitude towards its possessions, meaning its own other envelopments such as the body, prana, mind, intellect, etc.? These questions have been answered by the great Rishi in this stanza. A man after the realization of his self will thereafter face death as happily as he would face life and its changing vicissitudes. Thereafter, to him, death is not a tragic culmination, but in fact, it is a joyous beginning of an immortal existence. Thus, his only cry would be that his prana should merge with the all pervading air and that his body must go back to the dust from which it had come. As regards his mind, he cries, May you remember that you have done in the past, meaning the great achievement, the supreme experience. In fact, to a saint of realization, all that he could remember at the time is the unforgettable experience of the Absolute which lived at the moment of his own white heat of meditation. After all, our memory is always about our own most intense experiences. Thus, when the Rishi here says in the mantra, O mind, remember, remember, it only means that even at the moment of departure, let not our mind be distracted by any other thought. Let us get ourselves established in the continuous experience of that moment of fulfillment as a human creature. Vayu, the opening term in this mantra, is the freed spirit. According to some commentators, and Anilam means not a housed Nilam. Thus, it can give the suggestion of the self which is no more encased in or imprisoned by any material vehicle. Let the present body be burnt to ashes. Bhasmamantam Sariram. When it is Anilam, then it is automatically becomes immortal, Amritam. For the sense of mortality is due to the destruction of the body. 18वां मंत्र अग्ने न सुफ्ता राय अस्मा निस्वानि देव वयुनानि विद्वान युयोधस्य समुज्जय हुराण मनो भूयष्ठाम ते नम उक्तिम विधेम ओ अग्नि lead us on to wealth by a good path as thou knowest, O God, all the many ways. Remove the crooked attraction of sin from us. We offer thee our best salutation in this concluding stanza of the Upanishad, which represents the seventh and last wave of thought. In it, both the teacher and the taught together pray to their personal God to guide them by the right path towards the great goal, the wealth. Putting thus into the mouth of a perfected master a humble and a meek prayer to a Lord of personality. The great seer of the Upanishad is indirectly pointing out to the seeker that at the period of sadhana, every Vedantic seeker must necessarily have as an important item of his sadhana an unflinching, deep, and ardent devotion for a personal God. Let Bhaktas understand that true Vedanta is no enemy to them. Let true Vedantins come to feel ashamed of themselves when they cry down Bhakti in the name of their sacred faith, the religion of Vedanta. At the time of the Vedas, Agni was the god. Here, the prayer is an invocation to Agni, god fire. Here in this stanza, Lord Agni has been invoked to lead us to wealth. The materialist need not understand that this wealth means the sterling or the dollar. It is not the wealth of the economist that is meant here, but it is the riches of the spiritual seeker that is in the mind of the rishis here. Wealth is thus to be understood as standing for bliss or mukti or beatitude. The seeker's deathbed request is also only for the attainment of the supreme felicity. We offer thee our best salutations. Surrender of all the false conceptions in us is the way to cleanse our heart and prepare it for intimations from the highest. In the ritualistic portion of the Veda, we find the mantra for offering the oblations as Agne idam na mama, meaning, O fire, I give myself to thee. No more am I mine. Thus, Nama is a voluntary self offering, total and complete at the altar of the higher. Namaskar consists not merely in an elaborate demonstration of physical prostration nor in a casual oral expression. It is an active, dynamic, spiritual giving up and a becoming into the new awareness. ओम पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात्मुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ओम शांति 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 ओम तत् सत्. Meaning and commentary for this mantra. Already in the beginning it was given explanation. Now at this stage I complete this video. Thank you. Namaskar watching this video for watching this video. Thank you. Namaskar.